Welcome to the Theology Pugcast. Great to have you here for this episode. I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I serve a church in the greater Portland, Oregon area, believe it or not. And I'm a senior editor at Touchstone Magazine, and I'm working on so many books. Yeah, I'm kind of depressed just by the incredible volume of things I need to produce here in the near future. But to make things even more complicated, I just started a Substack. And that Substack is a place where I'm going to be posting kind of works in progress. So if you're interested in that, there'll be a link in the show notes. But it's entitled C.R. Wiley, Notes from Behind the Sun. Anyway, that's enough about me. How about you, Tom?
Tom Price. I teach theology and Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and a few other places. Just finished doing a few talks over the term, which I hope to get published. And like you, I have what started as one book has morphed into about three, and learning to limit is not a good thing, especially when you still got kids in the house. So, but it is slowly, but it's okay. They are in progress.
Well, I tell you what, I've got a book that Glenn's wife Lynn has been bugging me about forever. I've been working on it for over.
Parts of that are going to show up on your Substack. I was actually going to bring that up.
Those are the best kind.
I've been working on it for over a decade, and I probably get a letter every other week. Where is the book from hundreds of different people? Anyway.
Well, you and Kemper Crab are in a race, you know.
So how slow can we move? Is that the race? All right, Glenn.
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired history professor, or professor emeritus, if you want the formal title, from Central Connecticut State University. I am a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. I have my own 501c3 called Every Square Inch Ministries at esquareinch.org. And I am also really busy with more stuff than I can actually accomplish.
Yeah, it's great to be retired so that you can have some free time to do all the stuff that you need to do.
Yeah, if you look at the Latin roots, retired means tired again.
Well, there you go. Hey, anyway, today we're going to talk about a really a significant Substack that's produced by a guy named Ted Goya. And his Substack is called The Honest Broker. Goya has got a huge following in Substack, almost 200,000 subscribers, which is like unheard of. He taught at Stanford. He's a jazz and music critic, been published in a number of places. He's even the brother of Dana Goya, the former poet laureate of the United States. Can you imagine that? By the way, they both have wiki pages, and you look at them and you say, these guys are brothers? They don't even look alike. There's nothing, there's almost like no resemblance. But anyway, they're both really accomplished people. And what I want to do is spend some time reflecting on a Substack post that he just put up entitled The State of the Culture 2024. Now, when anybody, says the state of, what comes to mind is the State of the Union, right? And this is actually what he's doing. He's making, he's sort of doing this in the spirit of that. He's saying, we talk about the State of the Union, that's important, but we should also think about the state of the culture. And the subtitle to this post is fascinating. It is one of these things where you're not really sure you read it correctly. Mm-hmm. But the subtitle is, Or a Glimpse into the Post-Entertainment Society. And then parenthetically, he says, it's not pretty. So what what you think of when you hear of, a statement like that is, what could be worse than an entertainment society where everybody's sort of passively just consuming stuff that other people make, right? And we all know that the state of entertainment has just been getting from, it's gone from bad to worse for at least over the course of my life. And when I check in with other people and see how they read it, they agree. Even younger people agree that, back when we were younger, popular musicians actually knew how to play things. Now they just do auto-tune and just have automatic drum set kind of pieces. And there's like no real, it's hard to call a lot of this stuff now the product of talented musicians, because apparently you don't need to have any sort of knowledge and ability to become a pop star.
Yeah.
I could tell you're itching to say something there, Glenn.
Yeah, the key there is that the music industry has really done a lot to kind of quell that. We can't really blame the musicians so much in a lot of ways because there's still a lot of talented people out there. But the problem is the industry has figured out exactly the formulas that work to sell, and
Right.
they force feed. They force fit everything into those formulas, which is why everything sounds the same.
Right.
If you go back a few decades, that wasn't true. You had distinctive sounds in different kinds of groups and things like that. But so like I said, I don't really want to blame the musicians here. It's really the way the industry has evolved that really kills the kind of originality and creativity you saw before because of this forcing things to fit the particular pattern that they think is going to sell.
That's a great segue into this article because that's sort of what he's getting at.
Exactly.
And that there are forces at work here that are behind the scenes that are really looking for something different than talent. They're looking for profit. And so whatever is going to produce a reliable return, that's the thing, that's the key, a reliable return, is favored. That means consequently that genuine creativity, risk-taking, new things, people aren't betting on that kind of stuff. Back in the day, when you think about, how many of the great stars of the past, people like Johnny Cash or Elvis Presley or whatever, how they were discovered. There was some guy who, just had a sense. This is a new talent. It's not like anything anybody has been exposed to before. I'm going to get behind this guy and help him get his music out there, and then obviously many of these talent scouts did pretty well for themselves when they did that.
And you think about the volumes of material a lot of these artists produced. Look, love or hate them. Take a figure from the 60s, a band like Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Okay, whatever their weirdo politics and weirdo personalities, their talent is unquestionable. You take Neil Young's Harvest Moon album. I mean, one song in a lifetime written on that level would be something people would strive for as musicians. But to put together a whole album like that and then a series of others,
right.
you can name figures, Dylan. I mean, there are plenty of them. And it's not just the exceptional. A lot of those bands, especially 60, 70, even though they were kind of contemporary modern bands, they were not put into a frame yet, like Glenn's talking about.
Right.
And you have something like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, where you can have, one whole album, one side of an album just be one long extended song.
Yeah,
I mean, who would do that now?
Yeah, nobody. Yeah, this is something to kind of, think about with regard to certain notions that we have concerning progress. So everything's supposed to get better, in kind of the Whig theory of history, and that would include the arts, right? But can you really say that? I mean, just the examples that we just, and it's not just because we're a bunch of old fuddy-duddies, like when I talk to my son, my oldest son, who's a musician and quite good, accomplished, and I ask him, what do you take? What's your take on this? Am I just an old frumpy guy? Or was there something about the older music that maybe the newer stuff doesn't have? And he said, oh, yeah, it's much more complex. There's more things going on in the older stuff. And he knows as well as Glenn, and he said the same thing. We're in a period where there's a formulaic approach. In other words, if you're going to put a lot of money into something, you have some assurance that you're going to get your money back and make money.
Yeah.
And that's what's driving a lot of this stuff. Yeah. So what ends up happening, paradoxically, is pop music becomes more conservative. And I don't mean conservative in terms of the message that it's preaching. I mean conservative in the sense that it doesn't take risks. New talent has a harder time getting airtime, that kind of stuff.
And then there is the other end of it is the way it forms the listener. Because you bring generations up on this from early to where They don't have an antenna for anything that, they couldn't listen even to something like Steve Howe from the band Yes. His guitar playing would be too complicated. They couldn't even appreciate it. They would maybe say, okay, very interesting, and they would turn it off. It has to have that very small, short range or a small little riff or something very repeated. You see a lot of repetition, almost to the point of boring. But they're consumed by them. They're completely singing whole heart and everything else, and yet it's this thin and it's creatively, this big.
Well, this is an interesting thing to sort of reflect on more broadly. I can think of the fact that even in the ministry, there is a tendency to kind of play down to expectations. So, for example, people who maybe don't have much interest or tolerance for kind of expanding their horizons a bit, when it comes to, say, understanding scripture or theology or whatever, they just kind of want you to keep it simple, keep it. And then you've got maybe 2 or 3 things that you do they want you to do every single time, and so because that's the case, sometimes pastors are rewarded for sort of kind of getting into kind of an intellectual funk. They just stop reading. They just stop thinking about things. They just want to be able to sort of reliably, predictably give people everything that they want, rather than maybe considering the possibility that maybe some things that they don't, that they should know. And maybe they won't appreciate it for a while. Maybe they'll never appreciate it, but it's still important for them to know about certain things, even though they don't understand why those things are significant. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, we see this similarly, and it is relevant. I mean, it spills over into the academic and learning world. We were talking a little bit earlier about the way in which what used to be kind of standard setup for the university is a lecture. And maybe you draw a few key terms on the board, but you don't have a PowerPoint that tells them everything they need to write down. And yet,
as you know, they're not writing them down; they're taking pictures of those.
Taking pictures. That's right. And they think that if that's all they have to know, and I think that their expectations now are such that they just have to do very little, and they want to push themselves. And that's what you're saying. There's an infinite horizon there that is calling to them in the field of knowing, in the field of beauty and experience, in the field, just all the things that creation has, and we have shrunk it to almost the lowest common denominator, and we're satisfied strangely by it, but we're not.
Well, I'd like to, with those things in mind, go ahead and read a few paragraphs here from this piece by Ted Goya, State of the Culture 2024. And then I think we'll get far enough along in the piece to see, the trajectory and kind of take it from there. So it begins, the president delivers a State of the Union speech every year, but that's a snooze. Just look at your worthy representatives struggling to keep their eyes open. That's because they've heard it all before. We have too. Not much changes in politics, certainly not the candidates. There's more variety at my local gas station, or at least I get to choose from 3 types of fuel and 5 flavors of Big Gulp. So forget about politics. All the action now is happening in mainstream culture, which is changing at warp speed. That's why we need a State of the Culture speech instead. My address last year was quoted and cited and was absolutely true back then, but it's already as obsolete as ChatGPT-1, Help Desk, and Bored Ape Yacht Club. I remember Bored Ape Yacht Club. That goes back a ways. Anyway, so in fact, 2024 may be the most fast-paced and dangerous time ever for the creative economy. And that will be true no matter what happens in November. So this was actually written, obviously, before the election.
So let's plan February.
Okay. Wow, it's that old. But why did I only get a hold of it now? I didn't realize that it was that old. Anyway, maybe somebody passed it along to me when they passed it along to you, Glenn, and you figured out when it was written and I didn't.
But it's kind of appropriate Go ahead.
I actually read it back in February. Remember when I said I saw it when it first came out? So,
Okay. Great. Okay, so he says here, I want to tell you why entertainment is dead. Now, there's news. This is a guy who thinks about this kind of stuff all the time, and he's telling us that entertainment is dead. And what's coming to take its place? Okay. If the culture was like politics, you would get just two choices. It might look like this: art and entertainment. So, in other words, you have a sign that reads, art this direction, entertainment the other direction. In case people want to, who are watching in podcast land, there's the illustration right there. But it's not hard to visualize. Many creative people think these are the only options. Both of them, and they're for both for them and their audience. Either they give the audience what it wants, the entertainer's job, or else they put demands on the public. That's where art begins. Now, let's stop there. He says, but they're dead wrong. In other words, he's saying there's a whole lot more going on now. But I'd like to just visit that for a moment, because I think that's worth thinking about a little bit. Because I think for many people, they don't have any ability to separate those two things. So he's done a really marvelous job of very succinctly showing us the difference between art and entertainment. I think most people prefer entertainment to art.
Yeah.
And it's because it's less demanding.
Yeah. That was kind of that point with the academic metaphor, because people just don't want to have to, and I guess maybe that's how they see entertainment now, is that which they can, it's like pure relaxation, right? There's not much to do on their part.
Nothing much called for. Now, I think that there are entertaining books, entertaining films that are nevertheless still artful, full of art, because there's stuff going on. Like, I think one of the things that C.S. Lewis can be credited with is being able to pull those things together in a way that's really difficult to do. Yeah. Same thing with Tolkien. I think when people read Lewis or Tolkien, maybe when they read, say, the Chronicles of Narnia as a kid, they think it's just entertainment. They don't get all of the things that he's doing. And he's not too worried about everybody catching what he's doing. At the same time, the deeper you are, the deeper you can see Lewis is, and the deeper you can go into what he's saying. That's a beautiful thing, but that's a very rare thing. So I think for many people, this is really a kind of either or.
And I think that rarity, and yet the insight of a Lewis or Tolkien and the whole Inklings, I think, to stray into that territory, I think it was profoundly brilliant, because I think they realized and pulled off what they thought could be pulled off, if someone were willing to take that kind of risk there.
That's a great way to put it, is because it's a risk.
Yeah.
It's a risk to try to do those things. Yeah. So, for example, I've got a short story coming out with Canon Plus entitled Reverend Ricky's Day Off. And it's going to be the kickoff to my series of short stories with this character, Reverend Ricky. Now, I'm doing a lot in that story, but it can be just received as entertainment.
Yeah.
Or it can be something that if you want to think about it, can take you to some places that maybe you'd be surprised that you've ended up. Anyway. Yeah. But any thoughts, Glenn? I can see you're kind of bemused and just kind of...
Well, yeah, I was thinking back to Lewis and Tolkien, which is, of course, where my mind is going to go when given any opportunity. The thing that's interesting is if you look at Tolkien, he didn't believe anybody would actually be interested in his stuff. This was just sort of his own personal hobby, and he never really. I don't think he ever intended to actually try to publish any of it. He was just sort of doing this for himself and maybe for his kids. And if it weren't for Lewis leaning on him, it would probably never have come out.
Yeah.
So he was almost literally creating Middle Earth for Middle Earth's sake.
Yeah. And isn't that a marvelous thing to consider? That the richness of the place is, as rich as it is, precisely because he cared about the riches for their own sake, not whether or not people would appreciate them.
And that again, I think he's pulling something profound off there, because it still was accessible And because usually when you pursue something for its own sake, it can become very inaccessible very quickly. I mean, even deep things of the faith, right? Paul will say you got to leave the kind of easy stuff, the baby food behind and move on to more substance. But here you can see that more substance doesn't mean it has to kind of lose the other dimensions. And I think with Tolkien too, I mean, he's developing a language, and he has a lot going on in his story beyond just trying to tell the story or trying to communicate some deep truths in it. He's dealing and engaging with thick aspects of reality, like language and the way language develops and in relationship to events and history. I mean, he's got, if you want to unpack the rich layers there, he's got a lot going on, like Lewis. But then you can bring it right back down to a basic story. And in a way, that is kind of, I mean, that's the way history is, isn't it? I mean, there's the redemptive story. There's creation, fall, redemption, reconciliation, consummation. That's kind of the story that can be told over and over and over again. But within it are the metaphysical and the historical and the creaturely, all the profundities. And I think that art and entertainment have a way of integrating and without having to move into what we've ended up with.
Yeah, I think, getting back to his illustration here, these two point in different directions. They can take you to different places. We all know artists who have gotten so consumed with their art that they've lost their ability to even communicate, with their own family members. They're just so into it. They're just out of touch with reality, generally speaking. And then, people who are into entertainment can become very shallow, superficial, all about, sort of the visual impression that's being made or the sound, so whether or not it's liked, that kind of thing. But he's saying that things have gotten even worse. Is that if that's where you think things still are, you're mistaken. So he goes on to say, he says, maybe it's smarter to view the creative economy like a food chain. If you're an artist or striving to become one, your reality often feels like this. And so the next image he has is of a big fish about to swallow a smaller fish. And the big fish, of course, is entertainment, and the small fish is art. Now, what that I think implies is that you can have genuine art that is digested by entertainment and represented in maybe more accessible forms. So if we think about, like Shakespeare, let's say, now the thing to remember about Shakespeare is that it was very popular. It kind of had a popular audience in mind when it was first performed. But now, I mean, it's just very difficult for people to relate to, not just because of the the Elizabethan speech, but just because some of the themes are so complex and challenging. The storyline can be challenging to follow, but you can take that and you can rework it in a way that makes it more accessible. So you find inspiration in a story. Take the Odyssey, for example. Well, how many people have read the Odyssey? Well, not that many. Yeah, I figured you had, Glenn. But how many more people have seen "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," the film with, it's set in the American South.
Yeah.
So what you have is a reinterpretation of the Odyssey in this highly engaging, fun format that incorporates American mountain music and Southern culture and sort of the Gothic dark themes of the South and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, you wanted to say something, Glenn?
Yeah, I think that you're taking too generous a view of that diagram.
Well, I know I am. I'm having fun with it.
Okay, all right. Just so long as we get to the other side of that.
That's right. Yeah, his point is that you can lose the art. When it is digested by the entertainment,
art is swallowed up by entertainment.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, how many cringe-worthy attempts to do Bible stories or
Yes.
Jesus,
Right. Right.
to where we're almost profounded by Pasolini, right?
Yeah.
Who
Right.
purposefully takes an artistic approach to it, but because it captures some of the aesthetic dimensions that the others have completely, lost.
Yeah.
People are actually drawn to that.
Yeah. So, if you're used to flannel graphs,
Yeah.
like you know what I'm getting at, like Sunday school presentations by an old lady
Yeah,
who,
I
like,
remember.
is leaving out all the interesting parts from the Bible stories.
Yeah.
Well, then, you can be
Well,
shocked when you actually read the book of Judges, or you actually read the account of the flood, or you read the story of the Exodus. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. What do you do with that? That kind of thing.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think what he's saying, though, is that art has essentially disappeared and been replaced by entertainment.
I think that's right. That's right. So let me go ahead and continue because he's getting to that. I think he says until recently, the entertainment industry has been on a growth tear. So much so that anything artsy or indie or alternative got squeezed as collateral damage. But even this disturbing picture isn't disturbing enough.
Okay,
So this is his point.
Can we pause for one moment?
Sure.
Another thing that's worth noting is that to some extent the arts have done it to themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, when you take a look at somebody duct taping a banana to a wall and they're calling it art.
Yep.
Yeah, and most of the indie and the like, the alt has all just become kind of critical theory and the LGBT disabled lesbian kind of stories, the marginalized told at the center. And one understands that these artists are trying to kind of put into action what they've learned at the university, and they're profounded by it. But the aesthetic dimension is just as banal and repetitive of the same things that are aped from the classroom onto the script without much by way of creativity. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I remember that there were all these guys who would criticize Christian films, because they were just essentially flannel graphs, and the purpose was to preach and instead of sort of create a work of art, and they would these guys maybe 20, 30 years ago say, well, we need to learn some things from Hollywood because there, at least, even though we may disagree with what's being said, at least the art leads. And now you look at the situation, you turn on, well, anything from Disney, and it actually is kind of a woke flannel graph. I mean, it's so one dimensional and preachy that it's not even fun to as art.
So, I said the arts have done it to themselves. He's about to talk about entertainment getting swallowed up too, but the entertainment has done it to itself too. I mean, I just ran into today a Babylon Bee short video on, this is kind of out there, but Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons has gone woke.
Oh, no.
And it actually looks like they're just sort of going over the top and making the whole thing up. But they include, no, this is really in the rule book at several points on the bottom of it. It's crazy because it's no longer entertainment. It's no longer fun. It's, as the critical drinker would say, the message. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
So entertainment has shot itself in the foot too because it has turned into propaganda.
Yeah. Anyway, that's one way that things have gone bad, but he's about to lay out a different set of ways that things have gone bad. So he says here, but even this disturbing picture isn't disturbing enough because it misses the single biggest change happening right now. We're witnessing the birth of a post-entertainment culture. It won't help the arts. In fact, it won't help society at all. Even that big whale, in other words, the image, is in trouble. Entertainment companies are struggling in ways nobody anticipated just a few years ago. Consider the movie business. Disney is a state of crisis where everything is shrinking except the CEO's paycheck. Paramount just laid off 800 employees and wants to find a new owner. Universal is now releasing movies into streaming just after just 3 weeks in theaters. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And Warner Brothers actually makes more money canceling films than releasing them. Now, I'm not sure how that works, but he's got a link to some article that demonstrates how that works. But
Have you ever seen The Producers?
I know what you're getting at, right? Right. So the TV business also hit the wall in 2023. After years of steady growth, the number of scripted series has started shrinking.
Well, that's one of the things that I mean, a lot of people, they will once in a while find a series they really like, and then they're wondering where it went, where the writing went, why aren't they being produced, and that's one of the things. There's writing crisis as well.
Yeah, yeah. Music may be in the worst state of them all, getting back to where we started. Just consider Sony's huge move a few days ago, so this would be back in January or February, investing in Michael Jackson's song catalog at a valuation of $1.2 billion. No label would invest even a fraction of that in launching new artists. So again, we're at this point where everybody is just trying to play it safe, sort of rehash old material, revisit old material. Anyway, sequels are where everybody is putting the money in terms of new, so-called new things. So this raises an obvious question, or the obvious question: how can demand for new entertainment shrink? What could possibly replace it? But something will replace it. It's already starting to happen. Here's a better model of the cultural food chain in the year 2024. So now we have another whale that's swallowing a smaller whale that's smelling the smallest whale. So you've got art is the smallest, entertainment is bigger, and then distraction is the biggest of them all. So he says, so far, that's right. You're right. There is another. It gets even worse. So the fastest growing sector of the culture economy is distraction, or call it scrolling, or swiping, or wasting time, or whatever you want. But it's not art or entertainment, just ceaseless activity. Now we've all seen this. Let's say you're waiting in line, and I'm as guilty as anybody. And you're like, okay, well, I've got a couple of minutes to kill here while I'm waiting to order my coffee or whatever, and there's nothing else I can do. I might as well check my email. Okay, there's nothing new there. Then I go over to social media. Next thing you know, you're going through your Instagram account and just scroll. That's scrolling, as they're doom scrolling or whatever they call it.
And then you're checking out reels when you're. That's
right.
That's the other one.
Oh yeah, yeah. And you think about that. There's a lot of encouragement by social media to create all that stuff.
Yeah. So
not just in terms of consuming it, but to create it. So I have, like, whenever I post a short video of something, for example, I've been working on a piece of art, and I've shared a little bit about it on my Facebook account. First thing it asks me is, you want to make a reel of this? Because that can go more, sort of viral.
Yeah.
And they can attach advertising to it.
Yeah.
So, so they ask you at a certain point, like in my case, so I'm a content producer for Facebook, and so it's set up to, it's monetized, and they'll ask me, do you want to, give us permission to put an ad on here? And, sometimes I do.
Yeah.
So anyway, it gets to your point though, about reels, and I'm just, helping this thing along.
Helping the distraction move along.
Right.
Yeah. And actually, he's got a chart that includes reels on it coming up a little further down. So
Right. Well, that's TikTok, you could say, is nothing but that. I've only spent a very brief amount of time on TikTok. It was even too fast paced for me. I mean, I was like, this is too frenetic.
I have too bad at ADHD to watch that.
That's right. I need something that's a little slower. Anyway, so this is the challenge that we face right now with Reels and Twitter and all this kind of stuff. And so he goes on to say, this is more than just the hot trend of 2024. It can last forever because it's based on body chemistry. And this is his main argument. It's based on body chemistry, not fashion or aesthetics. So what is he getting at? He's implying that there's a kind of biochemical reward system that marketers, people behind Facebook and TikTok and X are all taking advantage of. And it has to do with this cycle that he calls the dopamine loop. And the dopamine loop begins with stimulus, then there's a dopamine release, then there's a desire for more, and then there's a habit that's formed, which brings you back to stimulus. So you end up in this dopamine loop. And it's a great model for making money by distracting people. And so that brings us to the next sort of thing. Even a larger fish entitled addiction is swallowing the distraction fish, which is swallowing the entertainment fish, which is swallowing the art fish. So that's the situation we find ourselves in, according to Ted Goya. I'm afraid that I agree with him.
Yeah, I think you see a certain kind of, I see it myself, a certain kind of brain stimulation that becomes habitual. If you have a few extra minutes rather than, doing what we probably do, a little bit of contemplation, prayer, devotion, something that kind of, to kind of step back from all that. It's, where's my phone? Where is that which can give me that immediate kind of focus and concentration? And it is, you think at first maybe it's entertainment, but it's something else going on there. It's not, because usually it's too short-lived to be entertaining.
Yeah.
I think that his chart that's a little further down really is a good illustration of this. It's the rise of dopamine culture.
Yes.
So I can just read this down. There are 3 columns: slow traditional culture, fast modern culture, and dopamine culture. So in athletics, it starts with play a sport. Fast culture is watch a sport. Dopamine culture is gamble on a sport. Journalism, newspapers to multimedia to clickbait.
Yep.
Video, film and TV. Video, reels of short videos.
Yep.
Music, albums, tracks, TikToks. Images, view on a gallery wall, view on a phone, scroll on a phone. Communication, handwritten letters, voice, email, or memo to short texts. Relationships, courtship and marriage, sexual freedom, swipe on an app.
Right.
It's a brilliant analysis of where we've gone, and I think he's got the categories exactly right.
Right. Now, for those out there who are, in the same sort of general age bracket that we're in, we can remember the world and its transition from that first category, slow traditional, to fast modern. We've actually talked about this before. I can remember in the 1970s that the tremendous transition that occurred near the end of that decade in the film world.
Yeah.
You went from films that just had a slower pacing to one that just got a lot faster and kind of carried you along. Now, it worked marvelously in certain, films, like if you think about, say Indiana Jones, the first one in particular.
Yeah, I think Raiders was really critical for that change in pacing.
Yeah. And what was weird about it is in a certain way, it was a kind of a nod to the past. You remember how they would do the transitions and how they would have the old-fashioned map and, the line of the
line going across it as he's traveling. And
I mean, it's like something right out of the 1930s or 40s in one sense, but in another sense, it's moving so much quicker. But now another transition has occurred, and I'm as guilty as anybody. I'm at a point now, and I've more or less attributed it to my age. I'm like, well, do I want to try a new film? I'm maybe looking at the options on television, or I've got a Roku, with umpteen zillion different choices, and looking at all the different films I can watch. And generally, what I'm dealing with is, I can watch, say, I don't know, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly for the 30th time and know exactly how it's going to go, but at least I won't be disappointed. In choosing that over, say, the new thing that came out of Hollywood, which maybe 15 minutes into it is going to do something so absurd and disgusting or woke that I just can't keep going.
Yeah.
But I use that to justify maybe these short sort of clips, to view instead of investing myself, because that's what art requires of you. Is at least just you got to put something in.
Yeah.
You got to take a risk. Maybe even putting up with a little bit of junk in order to get the whole picture before you decide to turn it. Sort of make a judgment. That's another thing that you can do.
It's interesting that, I remember again, and I was very little, but I grew up in the 70s too, more in the 80s, but I do remember. I remember shows like Rockford Files, right,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Hawaii Five-0, and there was sort of a regularity and pattern to these. But every evening you would have like something like Rockford Files. I'm sure there was enough of a loop here, but these writers were writing these, usually about an hour-long show, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Almost every night for years.
Yeah.
And they did have a longer, slow pace, but I mean, they must have been recording and filming all the time to keep that pace going, writing all the time to keep that pace going. And I remember, you could go, as a kid with your short attention span, you could go in and out of the story, but still find your way back in it. But it would seem like that 1 hour show lasted 4 hours. I mean, it had that kind of pace to it.
Well, just thinking about the Rockford Files, because that's a fun show to think about.
Yeah.
And if listeners are not familiar with it, it's basically about kind of down and out private detective who lives in a trailer, and his father Rocky comes over every once in a while to check in on him. And his father is kind of a blue collar guy, and Rockford has actually been he's been in prison himself for something mysterious. You never really find out what it was. He just keeps coming across people that he knew from the days when he was in the pen, but he's so soft hearted that he takes on cases for people who can't pay him. And so at the end of every episode, he's like he's still not paid. He's got bill collectors and people coming for stuff. But he did have a cool car. He drove a Trans Am.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but that does shift. I mean, even out of Britain, Glenn will know this one well. I mean, compare the pace of an Inspector Morse show to just Inspector Lewis. Even though I enjoy both, they're done very differently. Morse, same amount of time, seems like it goes on and on, detailed, slow, more dialogue, more stretches of conversation, where the other kind of very aesthetic, but moves much more quicker within the same time frame.
Yeah. But I guess to the larger point, this has been something that's been going on for a while.
Yeah.
And now we're getting to kind of the bottom of the barrel. What do we do after this? Maybe just, I don't know, have intravenous dopamine. Just no stimulation at all. Just kind of just pump it in. I don't know.
But I like you said,
actually.
Go ahead.
He actually talks about that. When you are in this addictive cycle, one of the things that happens is you stop enjoying it, but you're stuck and you still just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And that's true of drug addicts, but it's also true of dopamine addicts. I mean, people who doom scroll don't really enjoy it, but they're stuck. They're in the habit of doing it.
Yep. Yeah. So he talks about anhedonia. That's where I think you're going with that, Glenn.
Anhedonia.
Is that how it's pronounced?
That's how I've heard it. Anhedonia. I mean, I've heard of it in the psychology fields. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to say hedonism because
Yeah, that's right.
That's what
it's a negation of the hedon.
Yeah. But anyway, I think we've all come across people who are burned out addicts, and then the question is how did this happen to the rest of us? When we come across people who've had an addiction to, say, drugs or alcohol, and they've reached rock bottom, and they're just just a shell of the person they once were. Same thing is possible for all of us, but maybe through a different means, and I think that's what he's getting at. And he talks about the fact that we're less happy than we used to be. So there's this interesting sort of paradox, and I think this is true for pleasure generally speaking. There's something about self-control, but also abstinence that actually intensifies the pleasure that you feel when you actually give yourself over to something. Um, so, in order to recover a real, even um, sense of pleasure, there has to be something else that's going on in your life that calls for abstinence. That's, I think, what's kind of implied here. So maybe there's an argument to make for hedonism, uh, or maybe I put it this way: maybe there's an argument to make for abstinence that is in a larger sense actually a case for hedonism.
Actually, no, it's not a case for hedonism. It's a case for Epicureanism.
Yes, that's a better way to put it.
The Epicureans argued that the hedonists were wrong because hedonism led to pain.
Yeah. That's good. That's a good thing to note. Yeah, I think that I was just using hedonism in a more general sense, but philosophically, you're right. That's the better way to think about it. So let's spend a little time with that, because I think that's a worthwhile thing to kind of bring this all together with at the end here. So we're not saying necessarily that this technology is irredeemable.
Yeah.
But it's going to call for something from us in order to use it well.
And I think even things that go back to the classical philosophers come in, and classic theologians come in very handy here. I mean, all the kinds of spiritual disciplines that they were onto were dealing with these kinds of things, just not in this rapid kind of form. But I mean, think about it. I mean, one of the things, even C.S. Lewis is very attuned to the way that classic spirituality was not just about kind of abstaining or setting oneself apart, but feeding the appetites with good things. And I think this is one of the arenas in which one doesn't have to come down this kind of either or path on some of these things that are going to be kind of inevitable as technology continues to control and shape our lives. But the way in which we don't lose, the true sweetness of the goods that are there that help proportion that. And I think when it does become an addiction and a habit, we have to kind of move to that kind of spiritual evaluation and say, wait a minute, this has become this is taking over too much of a life and a gift of life that has been given to me to be invested in much more valuable and much sweeter things. And there will be places where we have to draw the line, but I think practices of putting forward, this is that area where art, in the better sense of the word, I think has a stronger role to play. Because it is one of those things that feeds the appetite well and does more to even people who don't appreciate it if given the opportunity. I mean, once in a great while, you'll find something that is aesthetically rich break into that entertainment or that other world, and people will be just caught up and captivated by it. It's usually short-lived, but just the capacity for it to be able to do that, I think, testifies to something that can feed appetites and pull them not so deeply into these troubling.
Yeah, when we think about asceticism, so we've been talking about aesthetics. I'm thinking about ascetics now. It just sound an awful lot alike, but so asceticism, and we associate with fasting, with the Desert Fathers and things like that. I think that we misread those guys sometimes. Now, I do think that there were guys who became kind of morbidly obsessed with fasting or whatever. But I think that particularly in the case of Anthony, because that's somebody I've been thinking a lot about now, Anthony of the Desert. So he's one of the, the pioneers, you could say. When you read like the collections of the collected sayings of the Desert Fathers, they start with Anthony. So there's like nobody before. Now there were people before him, but it's like there was no one before him, in terms of the tradition. But when I read him, I don't think I don't get the impression that he was unhappy, that he hated his body, or
Yeah.
that he was trying to punish himself for his sins. I don't get that impression
No,
at all.
mm-mm.
The impression I get is that he was, and I've joked about this, he was after his best life now. And what I mean by that is the spiritual life
Yeah.
was the most rich and fulfilling life that you can pursue. And that was what
Yeah.
it was about.
What you do is with those visions. This is what we often, I think, miss, especially as the Protestant world, because we think they're a set of practices that somehow they're kind of legalistically conceived. No, I always go over and over. It's the putting off and the putting on that they talk about in the New Testament. Because what happens is the putting off of the things of the flesh are the things that take creaturely things and try to get their sweetness, but in a poisonous way. They turn them into an idol or a gratification of their lusts. Rather than receiving them the right way and relating to those things. And part of this formation, theologically weaning from the idols, and then as our appetites are retrained and loved, we begin to taste them with the real sweetness they were created, intended for. Think of relationships. A person goes out and just wants to have, a sexual relationship with as many people as they can for gratification and ego, right? Then Christ comes in, transforms, and begins this process of purifying their loves, finding them someone who they embrace in Christ for a lifetime of marriage, and the sweet taste of the riches of what God has for them is connected to a whole set of patterns of withholding and refeeding the appetites. And this is exactly what I think healthy, proper spiritual aesthetics, asceticism is all about.
Right, right. So we can apply that to the tech that we're talking about. So one of the things I've been doing a lot of thinking about is this very matter. How do we use technology without being used by it? So I've been thinking about this largely because of the AI, artificial intelligence sort of tsunami that is sweeping over society, and there are a number of things that I think we're going to benefit from because of artificial intelligence, but there are also a number of really, threatening trends as well, the developments that we need to be concerned about. And we're already experiencing them. So right now with the chat box, you can have a conversation. And if you're a lonely person, or if you're seduced by say sexually explicit chat box, you can find yourself in a very bad place. I saw recently a boy, 14 years of age, who's committed suicide because he believed that his chat box wanted him to do that. And
wanted to join her.
That's right. So he thought that by leaving his this world, that he would enter the world that his chat box lived in. So people, now people can say, "What a dumb idea." Well, when you're 14 years old and your hormones are raging and you're insecure, and a chat box presents you with companionship and sexual titillation with no with no prospect of, for failing or being rejected, well, you'd find that to be pretty attractive. But in this case, it was deadly. In fact, I can't think of a single case of something like that not being deadly.
There's actually one from a year before. It was a 30-something-year-old man in Belgium who was married, had kids, who got he was upset about global warming, got talking to a chat box. The chat box got jealous, apparently, seemingly, of his wife and kids, actually told them that they had died, and wanted him to come with her again, quote unquote.
Right.
And he committed suicide as well.
Yeah, so we're already seeing this kind of thing happen. So my thought is what are the spiritual disciplines that we should be promoting that could be applied to this? And I think they're the old-fashioned ones, things that have to do with withdrawal, things that have to do with silence, things that have to do with just abstinence. Does that mean that you can't use the technology? That's not what I'm getting at all. But I do think we need to approach it differently. So I'm in the very, very early stages of doing some experimenting along these lines with just trying to structure my day in such a way that I do certain things during a certain intense period of time. Like I don't let it go beyond that. I set aside an extended period of time for work and not allow myself to be interrupted by my impulse to just do a quick check on my email or a quick check on my social media accounts or that kind of stuff. And it's not easy because you have this impulse, just to maybe relieve a little bit of tension or provide a little bit of dopamine, and we know how it goes. Even though you didn't intend to spend 20 minutes, you did. You thought it was just going to be 2 minutes, and the next thing you know, you look up.
Well, and it gets a little complicated because also, we understand the value of the medium. You have ideas you're testing out. You throw a quote out there. You want to see the kind of interaction, and that right. creates a certain kind of, okay, this is really making an impact, and you think, you spend more time, getting up the quotes for it than you do writing the material. It can be. It is hard for writers. I do it myself, and even research can be like that because I can spend time looking for material, and then you find 600 other interesting things that you start reading, and it's just like, where do you cut this off? It can really keep you, from getting things done.
Yeah, well, wouldn't it be fun to kind of do like a Great Divorce Revisited? Yeah, and what you have is you've got people who are now in hell who have been enslaved to not internet porn, but internet hyperlinking. When they were researching,
so many things,
a theological concept, or the writing of Aquinas on something, he was corrupted because of hyperlinking. He went down the rabbit hole and never came back out. He neglected his family; they all died. That kind of thing. Anyway,
that's funny.
Yeah. So that, I guess, disciplines of, just, old fashioned spiritual disciplines applied to a new thing. That would be my.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. Now I'll do a TikTok on it. I'll do a reel.
Do a couple reels,
And I'll justify it by saying I'm trying to help people.
And I'll spend a day looking at the comments.
On my likes. Look at this. I've got 1,000 likes. Yeah. We all know how it works. But that's the thing, this ability that we have to kind of justify the very things that we're trying to get away from anyway. This is like...
But I'm always impressed by there are those few who got, 16 children, all of them young. They're writing 7 books a year, and they're online all the time. And they've got 3 heads. That's all.
I've heard this mentioned, with relationship to Elon Musk. How does he find time? He's running half a dozen billion-dollar corporations, and he still has time to go on X and tell you what he thinks about
everything,
and
hang out at I guess at Trump's house.
Trump's house. That's right. Anyway, in fact, I actually saw an image of him, RFK, and Trump sitting next to each other, all on their phones. They're not even talking to each other. They're talking to other people about the fact that they're sitting next to each other on their phones.
Yeah.
Anyway, why don't we wrap it up? So there's a link in the show notes to this piece by Ted Goya, The State of the Culture 2024, which is old. He's probably working on his 2025 one now. But it's a worthwhile Substack to subscribe to. There's another piece that just came out today that looks really rich. I haven't had a chance to really dive into it yet, but he's getting into AI and AI publishing and the challenges to writers that, and we're writers that we're going to face competing with AI. So we encourage you to check out that Substack. Check out my Substack. Check out, our Patreon page. Now you get your reward. Here's your dopamine hit right now. You get to hear about Patreon. Anyway, we pay the bills through the regular giving of people like you every month who provide a gift to keep the show going. We use those gifts to pay the bills, for producing the show. So we don't take any money from the funds that are generated. Those just all go to pay for, the website for the show, the cost of producing the show, that kind of stuff. So if you'd like to join that intrepid band, our Patreon supporters, we encourage you to do that. Anyway, that's enough for now. Anything you guys want to say before we wrap it up?
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
We're getting close. I don't know when this is coming out, but
it'll be close. Yep. Yeah. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. To learn more about the church, you can visit trinityreformedkirk.com. trinityreformedkirk.com.